Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope you're well, and as always, it's a pleasure to have you join again. Let me get myself all set up. Yesterday's session, I think, was interesting. I spoke to the men, and I want to build on the same theme and conversations that we have had over the past week and a half. But earlier today, I had an interesting question that was asked of me. And so I thought perhaps I should use my interaction today and try to merge my interaction with what we have been discussing, but bring in the responsibility of manhood into the picture. Now, I'm not necessarily sure, as I haven't prepared as I should have with regards to the delivery, but I hope I get across what I think I would like to. So let me start with the theme, the most important part of today's session, which is the purpose of a man. That's a question. The purpose of a man. A very, very difficult question to answer, but also one that we ponder on for years and years. And so let me start by saying that I don't think that I have all the answers. Let me begin with that much. What I am hoping to do, as I do with all of my videos, is to begin a conversation that might lead you down a path, the path you get to choose. The whole purpose being that you find, I guess, your true north, whatever that might be. The word philosophy, in its very core definition, means the love of wisdom. The love of wisdom and the pursuit of truth. Now, truth is something that many people have, certainly since the postmodern era, have debated about as to what is true and what is truth. I tend to find comfort in the word true. Now, I define truth very differently to, I think, what most people will. And to share my definition before I get into today's session, I'd like you to think about time. There's the past, there's the present, and there is the future, which is yet to come. I liken it to, in money terms, the past is like a spent check. The future is a promissory note. You can't cash that yet. The present is cash, and that's all you can spend. Now, to understand truth, you have to understand data, information, knowledge, and their definitions. I liken truth to be time without restrictions. It's a combination of the past, the present, and the future. And truth is what is at the bottom of everything we do. It's fundamental. It means you can take it across geographies, histories, time, space, and it has a consistent line. It's something that rings true. Another way to put this would be to think about many years ago, we believed, many years ago, we believed that the earth was flat. One of the reasons for such a belief was we couldn't fathom the idea of a round earth because it was difficult to understand how people could live on the edges or at the bottom of the earth if it was round. Now, we could understand people at the top, but we just couldn't fathom people on the edges because they'll obviously drop and fall based on gravity. We soon discovered over time despite the flat earth principle being called a fact, over time we realized that that fact could be likened to the past. That was the knowledge. There were limitations in what we knew. That was the knowledge we had. And then we got to what we considered to be the present, which was an understanding over time that the earth is indeed round, certainly not flat. There's a possibility in the future that we will discover some other new data or information which might either support the present conclusion or might change the present conclusion. Truth is what reigns supreme and what reigns across all time and space. So that is my definition. Now, with that said, we'll go back to the definition I started with, which is philosophy. Philosophy being the pursuit of wisdom, the pursuit of truth, the seeking of better ways to understand yourself and better ways to understand the other and the environment. Now, here is what's interesting. The pursuit of philosophy leads you down a belief system. Your belief system will determine your values. Your values simply meaning things that you put on a hierarchy of importance or priority or focus. Your values will determine what is right or wrong. In other words, morality. A lot of the conversations I have, many of you might think it immoral, or many of you might label it in the category of not consistent with your value system. In any case, I make it clear when I discuss that I do not speak from a position of morality, and I'm not making a value judgment either way. I'm looking at the environment we are in, and the question is, how do you navigate, especially within the intersexual dynamics area, how do you navigate this changing world that we have? So philosophy will determine your belief systems or your beliefs will forge and form your values. Your values will determine your morals will lead you down your ethics and what you consider to be things you do or you do not do. And that will determine your character. Your character will then decide the life you live. Your life represented the past, the present, and the future. The word character is something that you will hear me discuss in today's session as I move forward. And here's the reason. Earlier today, I was on the phone making some changes and to a service I have. And on the other side of the phone was a young, well, let me not assume to be a young man, but perhaps someone in his middle age, it could be older, I don't know. And he made reference to my disposition, and he said, it's nice to talk to someone who is happy. And he indicated and asked the question about, because the thing with people who work in call centers, they come across different types of people, and they can pick up very quickly a difference in intensity, vibration, energy amongst people. And so I said to him, well, every day I wake up, I count my blessings. I am a happy man because I'm lucky to be alive, and my blessings are numbered, and I go through the numbers, and I am forever grateful. So what he had picked up as this disposition that was positive was simply my gratitude for being here. And he said, now remember, this is supposed to be a business conversation. And he said, well, that he tries to look alive in that manner, but sometimes he struggles. And sometimes he is drawn to pain and challenges and difficult moments in his life. But he understands the importance of remembering your blessings. Now, I normally do not speak with people like this, but at that very brief moment, and stay with me here because I'll connect it to why I've chosen today's theme. At that brief moment, there was a pause. Now, I should have said that he had finished the task for which he was providing a service for. In other words, I had come to him, to his business, and he had represented the company, and we were done. And then the questions began. So there was a pause, and I kept quiet. And he asked the question. He said, "Do you mind if I ask you a question? I don't know you, but do you mind if I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah, go ahead." And he said, "Do you think that drinking alcohol is bad?" Now, let me also state that anyway, relevant. And I said to him, "Well, that's a difficult question. It's not an easy question to ask." But let me share with you what I gave him as a response, my humble response. I said to him, "Well, that everything in life has a purpose. And everything around us, or that came before us, or that will come after us, has a purpose. It has an inherent purpose. But not all those things around us, or the things that are created, we do not always know the purpose. And therefore, sometimes we use certain things in the right way, and other times we use certain things in the wrong way. But that if you do not know the purpose of something, then the likelihood of misusing or abusing such a thing is much higher than if you did. I went on to say, well, alcohol in itself, there is nothing wrong with alcohol. We use it. Sometimes the food we eat contains natural alcohols. We use it for medical purposes, for the right reasons. So we cannot avoid alcohol as part of our journey through life. But I also said people also use it for leisurely or for pleasure. And irrespective of your disposition and your belief system and what you believe to be right or wrong, there has to be an acceptance that at some level there is a need for alcohol. Now, I went on to say that some people consume alcohol, but there should be an understanding of the purpose for which the alcohol is being consumed. Now, we know if you go back in time, when people were severely hurt on the battlefield, they gave them some alcohol to numb the pain. When people were dying, sometimes they gave them alcohol to remove the pain, to stop the bleeding. Some people also use alcohol to reduce our inhibitions, to make us more socially apt, less awkward. Sometimes we use alcohol simply to numb our pain. And I said to him, you have to understand the purpose, and without going into your belief system or what religion you might be, because he asked, is it wrong? Some people say it's wrong. And I could understand from his questions that he was struggling and he was caught between a difficult place. And so I concluded by saying to him that whatever you do, always pay attention to whether there is peace or the absence of peace after your acts have been completed. In other words, when you drink alcohol, do you drink it excessively, and afterwards do you feel peace within you? In other words, do you regret the decisions you're making? And in conclusion, I said your conscience should be your regulator. And if you find that you're using it for the wrong use, and your conscience guides you emotionally, and you're not always numbing those emotions, then you will find your answer for yourself. But for me, I couldn't answer his question. Now, the word purpose was what struck my attention, hence today's session. The purpose of a man. over the sessions that we've done over the many weeks, I have been drawn to the realization that when we talk about intersexual dynamics, especially in the West, there is a huge confusion because there's been a void, because there's been lack of training and lack of teaching. My experience has been that most men these days, especially men in the West, do not have a sense of their purpose. What that means is that if you don't know the purpose of a man, or if you do not know your purpose as a man, there's a possibility that you will misuse or you will abuse a man, or you would misuse or abuse yourself. So, in thinking about today's session, I came to the question that I couldn't answer, which is, well, how do you define a man's purpose then? And the reason I struggled with is you might think, well, there are 3 billion, well, to be correct, 3.55 billion roughly men in the world today. So how can you have one definition that covers everyone? How are you not sure that your definition will exclude some of them? That's a very valid question. In any case, I have also known for many years that if you define something, then you place limits on that thing. Now, I'm not suggesting that one is good or bad. I'm just simply saying, if you define something, then you place limits on it, which is partly why when I talk to younger men and women, I've said, you have to be careful about what defines you. If you define yourself as a wife, then it would mean that you will restrict yourself to things that wives do. If you define yourself as a woman, then it means you will not allow yourself to embrace the possibilities and the genius in you beyond what society has defined as activities that women participate in. That was at the core, that was the core function of the feminist movement, choice, that you have the ability to choose. And feminism, in many ways, was trying to remove the definition that was placed on women, to say you can't vote and you can't do A and B and C. But by taking off the lid and the definition, women have achieved so much over the past 70, 80 years. Hence, what defines you places limits on you. But as I thought about those two juxtapositions, placing limits and coming up with a definition that covers everyone, I found some peace in my heart, which came as a result of the fact that I said, well, you don't have to choose one definition. This is where it gets interesting. Manhood is a term that we use. I'll go back to what I started with. Philosophy, the pursuit of wisdom, and the openness to listen to different positions. That will define your belief system. Your belief system will determine your values. Your values will determine your character, which will determine your ethics, or rather I should have said, your values will determine your ethics, which will then determine your character, and then the life you lead. At the core is what you believe. But I was reassured by the fact that the way we define truth can be the same way we define man. In the sense that something that lasts, something that is not restricted by time, and something that is not limited by geography. So when we talked about the past, the present, and the future, and we said what is truth, is something that goes through all those periods and maintains its integrity. In other words, it's almost like the foundation. So I'm going to give you a few ways of defining man, and I would let you extract from from these descriptions different ways of coming up with what could be seen as a useful definition, a useful reminder of what it means and the purpose of a man should be. The first word is character. Now, I talked about character when I went through the steps, but character is the first. Number 2 is foundation. Foundation. Number 3, first. First. Number 4, integrity. Standard. Number 6, 1. 7, stable. 8, predictable. 9, source, sustainer. I can keep going on and on, but what I would hope you would take is that the embodiment of all of what I've described, we call man. Now, man in its very essence then plays functions and plays roles and has the purpose. In other words, if I could draw out from all those definitions, all those words, if I could choose one, the word integrity and the word one come to mind. In the sessions that I did many days ago, I talked about infidelity, cheating, and more. Again, a difficult session to listen to, because depending on your belief system and what you consider to be right or wrong, and depending on your value judgments about life, you may have found the conversations to be very jarring and to be difficult to listen to. Well, welcome to the pursuit of philosophy. It's not supposed to sound good, but you should be a student, and one of the reasons for being a good student is so that you can learn. Now, let me deviate. I have found that when people converse, they do nothing more than reinforce their pre-existing prejudices. We are always looking for something that affirms what we already know. Now, a great person, I think it could have been Isaac Newton or Benjamin Franklin, once said that whenever he came across a new idea, that he made a point of writing it down immediately, because he had discovered that the human mind was so programmed to reject something that it did not consider to be consistent with the internal belief system. By writing it down, he was simply saying, I acknowledge. Now, I don't have to accept, I don't have to reject, but I'm choosing not to neglect what I've just learned. It's different, and I acknowledge that. Like the people who said, well, the earth was round. There were times when we burned people on the stake for saying, you know what, I'm going to pick up a phone and I'm going to punch in a few numbers, and somewhere 2,000 miles away, some other person will hear a ring, and if they picked up the same similar device, I can talk to them, and they can hear me clearly, and they can talk to me, and I can hear them clearly, and we will converse. We put those people on a stake and burned them alive. The narrative was that it's not possible. So, as you listen, keep that narrative in mind, and as you're wrestling with what could be different to what you believe, recognize that your belief system is simply a function of what you consider to be true. If you don't believe such a thing to be true, then it wouldn't form part of your belief system. Your belief system is also given to you, is programmed into you, until you start to change the program. A lot of the knowledge we have, a lot of our beliefs were pre-programmed before we got to the age of reason, before we could think inductively or deductively, and before we could logically choose. We may have had our sensory faculties in place, the ability to see, smell, touch, taste, hear, and all of that. But we had not developed our intellectual faculties, the ability to think and reason and focus and perceive the ability to imagine, the ability to go into our memory. We hadn't developed that, and most of our programming are simply paradigms and habits that we have been installed in our system, and therefore we go through life sometimes not knowing why we believe certain things, until we get to a position where we start to question rather than seek validation for our pre-existing prejudices. In any case, the reason I went through all of that is to simply say the embodiment of all the definitions I gave you about man is the word one. Now, I talked about this in a session before, and I used a useful example. The first proclamation, the first commandment from the books of antiquities, whether that be Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, is as follows. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, is one. Integrity, the embodiment of everything that is good, the embodiment of everything that is true, the embodiment of everything that is not restricted by time or place. So the qualities and the attributes that I presented to you as a man, think about those attributes and ask yourself a simple question. Do you resonate with each of those things? Now, for example, in my case, I seldom think many people will leave a conversation with me and say, well, I think he was being too subtle. So secondly, I don't think I've ever left the presence of people and have them say, well, he was different. He was different in this particular place, and then he was different in another place. And then when we saw him in a new environment, he was also different. And we're not really sure which is him. I was raised on the character and the importance of consistency and integrity, which means I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. Now, it doesn't mean I'm always right, and it doesn't mean what I say is always good, but I speak from my heart, and I say it, and I let it be. I'm consistent. The journey of manhood begins with recognizing your oneness with your words and your actions and your presence, which is why in the sessions I did where I talked about infidelity and cheating, I made it very clear that like a king was limited by his words. A king was sovereign until he or she, if it were a queen, spoke. But at the moment they spoke, they became limited by their words, because their words were simply the embodiment in form of who they were by their presence. Partly why, if you go back to the days of Rome, the ambassadors, the governors that traveled across the whole world, seeking for new territory, went with the power of Rome. They could speak wherever they were, and it was as good as the king speaking because they had been given the authority to speak. Now, let me bring it back to the conversation, because what I'm trying to position is the crisis of manhood that we see in the West, especially amongst young men, will continue. It will continue until it becomes obvious that the damage is too high. And part of the reason it will continue is because there have been very few people teaching young men the importance of recognizing that you are the foundation. Those who are in construction would agree with the following statements. If you're building a building, you have the superstructure, but you also have the substructure. It doesn't matter how beautiful the superstructure is, superstructure meaning everything above ground or everything above, let's say, the line of sight, because ground can be defined as lower ground, subground, but the substructure was what held the entire structure up, the foundation. If you wanted to build a tall building, a building that was wide, a building for different uses, it became more important to design the substructure carefully. You could design a shallow foundation, and for a simple one-story dwelling, you would use shallow foundations. But if you were designing a 50-story building in a particular location, then you would use a piled foundation. The foundation goes deeper as the requirement for a taller building or a larger building increases. Man is foundation. And by foundation, I'm simply saying that your shoulders are supposed to be built to support society. Now, here is a mistake we make. And this mistake is not exclusive to the West alone. The mistake we make is we have come to rely too much on the state. So much so that we do not understand that the state is a product of the family, the community. So two people come together, one person comes together. So whether you are a woman or a man, that's you. Two people join, they form a family. That family creates offsprings. Another family replicates that process. So you go from one person to two people to a family, to multiple families, we call those communities, to multiple communities that we start to call those nations. And then we collectively say that we're too many and there are things that we can do collectively, and therefore let us appoint public servants to serve us in those roles, and we pay them. We call that the state. We have failed to understand that at the bottom of every nation or state are the individuals. Therefore, we are only as good as the individuals that form the nation. You can't make great omelets from rotten eggs. So, if you want to make an omelette, the eggs have to be good. And if the eggs are good, then the possibility of having a good omelette increases. Now, the reason I say this is because at the core, when I use the word foundation, I'm simply saying to men, you have a responsibility. The responsibility is for you to be predictable. The responsibility is for you to be stable, to have integrity, to recognize that you are the bottom and you embody everything that has come before, everything that is in the present, and everything that will come after you. You are, therefore, the embodiment of character. Your responsibility then extends to being able to protect whatever domain you have been given, whether that be a village, a home, a nation. This is partly why the call to men whenever there is a war, for men to go and die for their country, is important, because we are the foundation. We give our lives in exchange for the continuity of time. Now, I hope you can see how difficult it then becomes to say, what's the purpose of a man? Well, rather than think purpose, I hope you can start to see that you're asking, what are the roles that we play as men? And what are the most important roles? And why do we play such roles? You know, someone once said the most important day of your life is the day you were born. But the second most important is the reason why you were born. We have raised a generation or two of men who have been told that their role and their purpose is to work. Well, and by work, it's defined as a job, it's defined as a career, it's defined as something you do to bring home the bacon. Here's what makes it very sad. We look to France and we could see the challenges they are facing as a result of wanting to change the retirement age, the pension age changes. Now think about this carefully. If I defined your purpose as work, then it would mean the moment you retire, then it means you have no more purpose. You have no purpose and no reason for being. Now, most people will realize that at 60 or 65, that's when your life really begins. Because now you have the opportunity to do what you want to do, because you've spent most of your life doing what you had to do. So we do not use job or career in defining a man's purpose. It's much more than that. Man, we source things, we produce things, We protect what we produce. We sustain what we produce. These are responsibilities. Now, my challenge and my call to men has always been as follows, that irrespective of where you find yourself, you may have been dealt a bad hand. And perhaps this is where most men struggle, most men in the West and in the UK, let's be very, very precise. Although the numbers are consistent in the US, Canada, Australia, but most men these days are being born without fathers and therefore have never seen and do not know what it means to be a man. They are told, well, be a man. And one of the things I know that scares most young men is they have no role models. They have nothing to emulate and nothing to steps, no steps to follow, because there was no man in the family, or even if there was a man, he never stayed, or some other complicated situation. As such, most men are running around trying to be everything to everyone and in everywhere. The coreness or the function, the foundation, therefore, is unstable. This also means that the structure that is built above his shoulders is also unstable because he doesn't have a sense of who he is. Now, my many years of work in construction engineering, I always found it fascinating how I would walk into a building after it had been finished, and I could not see the foundation. But as the engineer or the team of engineers that worked on the building, I could show you pages and pages of drawings showing all the piles, the foundations, the design from concept to scheme to detailed to tender to production to construction to post-construction installation. And I could show you all the changes that were made as part of the engineering process to get to the final product. And along the way, the level of engineering skill and knowledge, time that went into making sure that you were designing a building that could last for generations. The level of engineering was so great and so inspirational and so beautiful. But when it was finished, almost nobody got to see the foundation. We keep documents of the superstructure. Yes, we all often keep documents of the substructure, but no one really cares that much, really. And that is the role of a man in society. We're not seen, we're not even heard, but we're supposed to support, and we're supposed to support and withhold and sustain everything that sits on our shoulders. That is the charge. Now, I'm drawn to the charge called given to Solomon by his father David, in which he says, I am about to go the same pathway of all of my ancestors. Now, David was on his dying bed. And he said to his son Solomon, be strong and show yourself a man. That was the charge. But he goes, and this is perhaps one of the beauty of having a good father, but he goes on to explain what it meant to be a man. He said, obey the laws, obey the precepts, obey the commandments, obey the decrees, obey the laws. And if you do so, you will find success and you will be successful. In other words, he was giving him the cause effect. Now, I'm summarizing the entire conversation, but the point was that before that, he had made preparations for Solomon to see his father at work. So Solomon had something to emulate. Now, we don't always emulate our fathers in the right way. Sometimes we deviate. But the point being that he was given a charge. And so when I spoke with a guy over the phone, I thought, purpose and manhood and men. How do I bring all of this together in a way that I can encourage men to think more of themselves, not just as providers, but as important. We have raised two generations who do not really understand the value of men. Now, I say this to my female friends and even to my male friends. If you were to stop most women and ask them, what's the purpose of a man? Most women don't know, but more importantly, most would tell you, I don't need a man. If you were to stop men and you ask the same question, most men don't know. Most might even define themselves as, well, to have a family or to have a good job, to be a law-abiding citizen, because we haven't been taught or raised. So let me share some additional information that I think could be helpful. The purpose of a man and the purpose of men is to present and to transfer the identity that has been given to them from one generation to another, irrespective of culture, geography, or ethnicity. That's the purpose, that's the core function, to take the identity. In other words, to give the identity that you have and that you have been given to the next generation. In that identity is a combination of many things: integrity, character, predictability, oneness, foundation, the embodiment of everything good, your actions being consistent with your deeds and your being consistent with your words and your presence. To take all of that and form it into an identity, and to instill and to place that identity on the offsprings that come as a pathway, not as a permanent position, but as a pathway until they get to the age of reason. Think about this, for example. A sponge. I can take a sponge in my hand and I can put that sponge in water or in oil, and it will absorb a smart liquid, and I can squeeze out the liquid, and I can place the sponge in another chemical and it will absorb, and I can squeeze out. Until we get to the age of reason, we are like sponges. We are absorbing everything. Therefore, the role of a man or a father, a provider, a male presence, is to instill at the very early age what I consider to be the foundational aspects of what a man is supposed to be, that identity, so that you do not deviate and you're not rattled by societal norms until you always maintain integrity. That's the first, identity. The second is then vision. To come up with a vision of what the true north should be. Now, we never get that right. One person's north is another person's south, which is partly why I do not talk about morality and I don't discuss value judgments. We're all different. We're never going to agree. And even as you listen to what I'm saying, perhaps there's an irritation you may even have. And that's partly because your installation system, your installed programming, differs from my installed programming. But we can coexist. We can disagree without being disagreeable, which I think is something to achieve, to aspire to. That I can coexist with you, not agree with you, but respect your position. A man, therefore, recognizes that I could have come from the Far East, or I could have come from the South, or I may have come from the West. And therefore my morality and my beliefs and my ethics could be different to the other man, but I respect his identity and I respect his vision. Identity, vision. Now the third is structure, or what I call boundary enforcement. That you're not trying to be too many things. The great writer says, this one thing I do, forgetting the things that are behind, I move towards my calling, my goal, looking neither to the right or to the left. I'm focused on my true north, that destination. I have an identity, I know self, I have a vision, and I have a destination, and I have a structured, disciplined pathway, a boundaried approach that would enable me to go from where I am to where I want to get to. Now, in doing so, I'm journeying, and as I journey, I'm going to meet other people. Therefore, I need to have a way of thinking, a philosophy of life that I should be open to. And so part of the pursuit of responsibility of manhood is to teach other men the way to think and the love of wisdom and the love of ideas, so that you can form your belief system and so that you can let go of a belief system when you find information that might be more superior or information that contradicts a position that you may have had. Now, with that, you can then develop your values, your morals. You can develop a way of living. That is at the core of the charge of a man. So, for example, let's break this down. You are a single individual. Maybe you become a father, and there's more responsibility. But whether you are an individual or whether you are a father or grandfather, there is a charge. There's a calling to you. Show yourself a man. Obey the laws. Obey the precepts. Obey the commandments. And you will find success. And your responsibility, therefore, is to take what you've learned and pass it on to the next generation. However you get that across, entirely up to you. And along the way, you will come across people and you will come across temptations. Like one of the things I do not do, I don't claim to be holier than thou, I have my skeletons. One of the things I do not deal with subject matters idealistically. This is one of the things that has caused so much of a confusion amongst men these days. We've made things too fluid. I don't deal with things idealistically. I look at life through what I call the tragic lens, which is the realistic lens. I look at time and I say, well, what have men done, and what has man done over 2,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years? And are we more the same as our ancestors, or are we different? So I don't deal with idealistic positions. Ideology causes damage. I stick to principles, foundations, and I see things as they are. And I accept things as they are, and then I try to make them change if I can. Now, the reason I say that is simply to make a point, which is, I don't care so much for whether you disagree with my positions. I would like for you to disagree with my positions. What I do care about is an ideological position, which is too rigid. Now, I have to say that because I have to remind myself that I'm guilty and I could fall for the same temptations of being too rigid with everything I've shared so far. The reason I share this is so I have an opportunity to test my thesis and to have it challenged and for someone to poke it, but also so I can go back and I can reflect. I can reason and I can come up with perhaps a change. I can come up with the opportunity to debate my views, make an argument against my position strong enough, and as well as someone who was an expert in a position opposite to mine. That is what we decide to do as men. We can take a position, or we can argue that position, and we can take another position, and we can argue that position. Now, part of the reason why I wanted to talk about purpose is because in the West and in the UK, there's a crisis of manhood. The crisis of manhood is so strong that most men do not have a clue what it means to be a man, and many of them are struggling with their manhood. Most men do not have the frame and the responsibility that their forefathers had. And if we continue on this pathway, let's just say it doesn't look very, very good. And there's almost a call that we have to start, an alarm bell, a refocusing on the importance of men, the importance of manhood, the importance and the realization that without good, strong men, good, strong, kind, generous men, we don't have a nation. And that we shall not and we should not allow ideologies, whether they come from the east or the west or the south or the north, we should not allow ideologies that cause what has been at the foundation of something good to be thrown away. So let me bring today's session to a close by giving you a charge as a man. Your pathway as a man, wherever you are, will be hard. If it's hard, then do it hard. If you find yours is easy, then do it easy. Never complain. Never explain. Pick up your cross every day, and up the way you go to the place of skulls, because that is your charge. On the beaches of Normandy, we had men who did not think about themselves, who simply said, we love the land, we love the people, we love the traditions. We want to pass on and we want to protect the next generation. And therefore we give our lives in exchange for the transfer of the identity, for the transfer of the vision, for the transfer of the discipline and structure, and therefore the values and the morals. And every man that comes has a charge. Be strong and show yourself a man. Pick up that cross and up you go. And along the way you meet other men. Some will help you along the way and some you will help along the way. Now I've talked about 4 things that in society men are supposed to provide or do. But let me start by prefacing those 4 things first. But to do so, let me talk about 3 groups. In the sessions that I do, there are 3 groups, 0 to 18. I don't speak to such a group that much. Why? Because you shouldn't be listening to someone on YouTube. Go speak to your father. Your father is the main line of authority, and therefore I wouldn't take such a position as undermining what your father says. Right, wrong, or indifferent. The second group is 18 to 35. My core focus, because you are an adult at 18, and therefore you've reached the age of reason and you can choose. 35 and above, I think you're a man, and you should be responsible for your choices and decisions. And while some of what I share can be used, you are a man. Now what this simply means is that the 18 to 35 group are the core. But here is something that is consistent across the 3 groups. From a young boy's age, we keep our score. This is the key thing. How do men keep score? And therefore, how do we find our fulfillment? A very important conversation, perhaps I should do as a separate session. How do we keep score and how do we find fulfillment? How do we find meaning? And therefore, how do we know we are in a place of our purpose? Young boys, success, sports, sex. Now, I don't care whether you believe young boys should be having sex or not. Sex, I mean the derivatives of sex, whether that be physical, whether that just be dating without any physical, or whether that be sexual, non-sexual, or whether that just be interest in the opposite sex. Boys keep score through success, academics, achievements, sports, achievements, sex, the opposite gender, because we are drawn to the opposite gender to seek their validation, affirmation, praise, and young boys are always drawn to women. As we move from the young age into adulthood, we let go of the S's and we pick up what I call the P's: provision, protection, the priestly duties, and professing our love. And what you find is that in each of those, we have transformed what was something simple, and we've actually put it in a way that it can be measured. That we are responsible for sourcing, supplying, protecting, and nurturing, and then being present. And so for most men, we keep score by our ability to provide, our ability to protect, however you define both, but the priestly duties, which has to do with what I explained before, identity and vision. The priestly duties combines both. Who are you? Who am I? And where am I going? And even why am I here? That's the priestly duties. And then your presence. You profess your love as a man with your presence, but you do so in different ways. For your presence is that you have to be present. Now, for whatever reason, if we are called home to glory too soon, then we can't be present. But if we've laid the right foundation, then we are still present, though not physically. To understand how you can take what should be an idealistic purpose and how you can transform that into responsibility and how you can find fulfillment by ensuring that you are within a place where you are celebrated, a place where you're recognized. And here is the charge perhaps I'll give to men. Big mistake I have seen. Men generally go wherever we are wanted, praised, and needed. So my charge to men is find the place, find the people, find the woman, find the community that understands your role as a man, that understands your gift to the community as a man, or to the people, or to the environment as a man, but places and environments where you are wanted, where you are loved, and where you are honored. Now, in the session I did yesterday, I spoke about honor and the lack of honor. And it's important for men, if you take everything that I've shared so far, one of the things you will find is that you start to honor yourself first, because you understand who you are and why you are here. And you will then find places where you are honored. And when you find such a place, you stay. You protect where you are, that environment. You preserve that environment. And you nurture that environment. Now, I hope that's been useful.